We have lots to talk about in today's video, including the latest trade rumors around the NHL. Today's rumor mill focusing on teams like the New York Rangers, Montreal Canadiens, Vancouver Canucks, Seattle Kraken, and the Chicago Blackhawks. It looks as though we're going to have a fine for the Dallas Stars for violating the CBA. We have several major milestones achieved here in recent days as well, including ones from Sidney Crosby, Patrick Kane, and Brind'Amour. We have big news from the NHL waiver wire, some more injury updates and roster moves, and another big upset today at the World Junior Championships. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss here in today's video. Let's first start with news from the NHL waiver wire. Yesterday, we had news that the Montreal Canadiens had placed backup goaltender Caden Primeau on waivers, and this afternoon we got word that he in fact has cleared. Nobody picked him up, and the Canadiens have reassigned him to the American Hockey League. So Primeau, we know, had major struggles this year, appeared in, I believe it was 11 games, goals against average above 4, save percentage in the 830s, absolutely disastrous season for him. Obviously, after last year and carrying 3 goaltenders, the Canadiens obviously chose to trade Jake Allen and keep Primeau around, hoping that he would, form a solid tandem with Samuel Montembeault. Montembeault has had his ups and downs, but generally speaking has been pretty solid. But Primeau, on the other hand, not so much, and has gotten to the point where they don't feel comfortable or confident enough to even put him in the net anymore. So he'll go down to the American Hockey League, see if he can refine his game, refine his confidence, and we'll see if he has another chance in the NHL. I think it's going to take some big convincing to give him another opportunity, and wouldn't be shocking if his time with the Canadiens finishes up this season. But we'll see what comes next for Primeau, and if he can bounce back at all playing in the minors. Several injury updates and roster moves from around the NHL. We got word today that the Vancouver Canucks and Coach Rick Tocchet confirmed that Captain Quinn Hughes and top centerman Elias Pettersson will remain out for at least the next couple of games. They will not be with the team for their upcoming short road trip between the Calgary Flames and the Seattle Kraken. Road games they have coming up here, so clearly, they're 2 very important players for this team. Obviously, they need those guys, and to lose them for an extended period of time would be a disaster. For the most part, the reports, I know Elliot Friedman touched on it on Saturday Headlines last night, saying what he's hearing out of Vancouver is that the injury news is not super serious or long-term, but there are some other skeptics out there that seem to think it could be longer than they're letting on. So we'll have to wait and see and follow this. I know some teams this year seem to be pretty sketchy with their injury updates and don't really want to give you much of anything. Everybody seems to be day to day. We've seen it in Toronto, we've seen it in Vancouver, we've seen it in Ottawa. You're day to day, but then all of a sudden they're out for 2, 3, 4 weeks, right? So it's just kind of not wanting to give any info, which is a little bit frustrating as a fan. I do agree. In Tampa today, Jake Guentzel not playing their game today against Montreal Canadiens. He's injured and listed as day-to-day. The Minnesota Wild today activated Joel Eriksson-Ek, so he'll be available to play in their game this evening against the Ottawa Senators. The Boston Bruins, who had Fabian Lysell up for the game yesterday against the Blue Jackets, has been returned to the American Hockey League. The Chicago Blackhawks today returned Kevin Korchinski back to the American Hockey League. He's played 9 games, and he actually had a pretty decent run, but I guess the goal for him is to go back to the American Hockey League and continue to build upon that. I think they want to give him some runs here in short spurts. Wyatt Kaiser has been recalled to take his place on the roster. One struggling member of the Washington Capitals this year, as much as that team has done extremely well and exceeded most people's expectations, Hendrik Lapierre has not done a lot of good personally. He has been one of the players on that team that has been well below expectations, and he's been sent down to the AHL. Of course, Lars Eller, who they picked up as a veteran centerman from Pittsburgh earlier in the season, is somebody who can play center as well. And certainly, I think part of the reason they acquired Eller was knowing that Lapierre may not be able to hold down that number 3 center spot. So we'll see how Lapierre does. I'm sure he'll get another chance later in the year. At this point, I suspect he's still part of the team's future and big plans, but he needs to get some things figured out to be more consistent at the NHL. The Oilers today made Jeff Skinner a healthy scratch against their game against the Anaheim Ducks. which they ended up losing 5-3. Jeff Skinner has not worked out, one of the few free agent signings that definitely has not gone way for both the team and the player. I don't know if it's just a fit issue. I thought it would be a good fit, to be honest, because Jeff Skinner has, for the most part, been a pretty consistent goal scorer, but he's had his ups and downs. Like, there's been times he's a 20-goal guy, sometimes he's a 40-goal guy, and he's had a few years where he's just bombed completely. But the one thing that's been consistent is he's a terrific, one of the best skaters in the NHL. This guy can skate with the best of them. Has all kinds of figure skating training. The edge work on him is phenomenal. So I thought that the ability to skate would help him, be able to skate with some of the top fast players like McDavid. And I thought he'd be a good fit, but turns out not so much. Has not worked out at all. So we'll see if this is going to lead to something further with the Oilers, if they're going to maybe either consider waivers or if they can find a trade. Thankfully, after the buyout in Buffalo, he wasn't signed to a big money deal, but certainly I think the Oilers might be having some buyer's remorse on that one. And Pittsburgh, their game today against the New York Islanders, they're doing a home-and-home series with them. Chris Letang out for today's game, and a minor injury listed as day-to-day. Now, as I mentioned, we got a lot of big milestones that have been achieved over the course of this weekend. Ovechkin has scored again today, and that game is still going at Washington against Detroit, so maybe this number will be a little bit lower by the time this reaches YouTube. But with Ovechkin's latest goal, he's down to 25 away from catching Wayne Gretzky for the all-time mark, so that's not really a big milestone, but it's just one that's getting closer. Rod Brind'Amour, the head coach of the Carolina Hurricanes, has become the fastest coach in NHL history to get to 300 wins. Obviously, Rod has had a lot of success with the Hurricanes during his time there as head coach. A lot of people were unsure about him. I mean, he was an assistant coach with them for a little while before getting the head coaching gig. But, really after retiring as a player, he didn't really, coach at the lower levels or really get into that, except, he started at the NHL, which is not real common, but with his level of playing experience, some people probably wondered if he would eventually maybe get to be a head coach, but it happened quick, and he is absolutely just nailed it and been phenomenal. So good on him. Fastest coach to that number. I'm sure he has a long future ahead of him in coaching, largely in Carolina. It'd be weird to see him with a different organization after all those years playing and then coaching there. Sidney Crosby with a major milestone as well, has now passed Muriel Lemieux for the all-time leader in assists for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So considering Muriel, one of the all-time greats, and certainly one of the obviously prior to Crosby, definitely the all-time greatest player in Pittsburgh history for sure, and one of the all-time greatest ever. To be in that kind of company is absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, it's unfortunate Crosby missed a lot of hockey due to injuries earlier in his career, or he probably would have achieved this much sooner, would be higher, a fair bit higher on the all-time list. But as it stands, Crosby, I think, is definitely going to go down. Definitely as a top 10, if not maybe even a top 5 or 6 player all time, depending on how long he plays and how productive he continues to be. But, he has been so good. What a legend already, and he's still playing. So Sidney Crosby, now the all-time leader in assists for the Penguins. Jaden Schwartz in Seattle, much lower, smaller milestone, but it's hit career point number 500. So for a lot of guys, the real good ones hit 1,000. 500 still pretty phenomenal as well. So that's a big milestone for him. And Patrick Kane has now hit 1,300 career points as well. He is now 91 behind the Golden Brett Hall for the all-time leader in U.S.-born players' history. So at this point, I know many people consider Patrick Kane arguably the greatest American-born player of all time. There's Brett Hall, as we know, was a dual citizen between Canada and the United States, but chose to represent the Americans on the international stage. Obviously, Kane, if he plays long enough, and at this point, we suspect he most likely will have a shot at being the all-time point leader in U.S.-born players' history. So that's another big milestone. With 1,300 career points is pretty phenomenal, regardless of where he finishes for his career. As I mentioned as well, the Darren Dreger is reporting today, after the reports that we discussed yesterday regarding the Dallas Stars, that they are expecting to be facing a pretty substantial fine. In the past, we've seen the fine be upwards of $100,000 for a CBA violation. In case you missed the story yesterday, we talked about in the video that over the Christmas break, they had a violation of the CBA by having a practice or a skate on Boxing Day, December the 26th. This year, and basically how it works is there's 3 days off for NHL players over the Christmas break. It's either the 23rd, 24th, and 25th if the NHL decides to schedule games on the 26th. Typically, they haven't done that. If there's none, then it's the 24th, 25th, and 26th are complete days off. They are blacked out. There is no play. There's no travel. So that you can't travel on Boxing Day to get ready for your game on the 27th. You can't have a practice. You can't have a skate. And the reason they do that is they want to have a level playing field so that all players get the same amount of time off. Obviously, games resume on the 27th. If teams that were home and not needing to travel had a practice and the teams that were traveling didn't, that wouldn't be fair, things like that. So there's just a set of rules across the board. And Peter DeBoer admitted during an interview, and I'm not even sure he realized he was admitting to something that was a violation or not, but did come out and stated that they skated on the 26th. Now, they made it an optional skate, but even the way the CBA is written, they can't even ask the players for consent to get on the ice. It was mostly all of their younger players that were playing or showing up for the ice time, but it's a complete violation, and there's really it's pretty black and white, to be honest. So Darren Dreger reports today that they do expect the All-Stars to be facing a fine. We're just waiting on the NHL to confirm that and make the announcement. Some updates from the World Junior Championship tournament as well. Of course, we saw the major upset the other day of Latvia stunning Canada in overtime. Well, today the Finns upset the Americans in overtime. Not quite as the same magnitude as Latvia and Canada, but still a pretty significant upset. The Americans, I think, were probably looked upon as being very, very likely to be undefeated during the round-robin tournament portion of the tournament. Maybe where they have to play Canada, the Canada-U.S. rivalry, that might be their only chance for a loss. And the way Canada has looked early in this tournament, I would say the Americans appear to be the stronger team. And at this point, I think I would be surprised if Canada pulled off the victory. However, those two teams, you just never know sometimes how it's going to go. And it's really not considered an upset if one team wins over the other. But in the past, Finland's been a pretty strong hockey country as well and has put up some pretty good results as well. Typically, they're not really looked upon as being, not a major underdog or anything like that. But the last few years, Finland hasn't quite done as well. Like earlier in this tournament on the first day, Canada beat the Finns 4-0. So they beat the Finns, who obviously are a good team, 4-0, but then lose to Latvia. It's just kind of a head scratcher. Then, of course, the Americans beat the Germans. The Americans beat Latvia, and then they get stunned against Finland. It's just kind of weird how it's been going. So, like I said, not the upset that Canada and Latvia was, but still pretty significant nonetheless. Now, some trade rumors around the NHL we want to get into. Another article from Pierre LeBrun and Chris Johnson, as we talked about the other day. There's what we call a trade matchmaker article that they put out, I believe it was Christmas Eve. And today they have part 2, looking at some more top players around the league that were expected to be traded and giving their matchmaking abilities on where they think they're going to end up. One player I want to discuss is Will Borgen. Of course, he's currently with the New York Rangers. Of course, he was recently acquired by the Rangers, and there's already talk that he may not stay there. The Rangers have been continuing to do poorly. We saw them obviously make some trades this year already, including the Jacob Trouba deal. Obviously they already moved on from their captain. We're expecting to maybe see some other stuff happen, but they haven't really gotten themselves out of the doldrums here. They're still playing poorly. They're still racking up the losses, and some of them in dramatic fashion. So it's expected that, if things don't turn around, I think it's getting to the point where Peter Laviolette, I think, has to be out of a job. There's just no way that I can see the Rangers keeping him on. Like, if you look at this team, they look completely defeated. Like, I don't know what Laviolette can do to get this team feeling better about itself or to get them going again. I'm not even sure it's possible. So I do see a change coming behind the bench sometime this year. And some more trades. Like, we saw the Kakko trade, obviously, which is where the Will Borgen came over from. We saw the Trouba trade, and the big question there is what's next. And if Borgen's not going to stay, he could be flipped. If the Rangers, like I said, they're pretty, likely at this point not looking good to be in the mix for playoffs. So with that said, the article has LeBron and CJ both picking their matchmaking for Will Borgen, and Chris Johnston has him going to the Vancouver Canucks. Now, we know the Canucks have been looking for help on the blue line for a big chunk of the year. That very well could come into terms of Will Borgen. Maybe he's the guy they're looking for. It won't be a super expensive kind of trade. Obviously, a player that's very serviceable, brings an element of, obviously the defensive side. He's not going to, do anything flashy offensively, but, for the most part, could be a guy that the Canucks like. Now, Pierre LeBrun has him going to the Florida Panthers, but there's also some talk about the Panthers going in a different direction after another defenseman, which I think makes more sense for them as well. So does Will Borgen make sense for the Vancouver Canucks, for Canucks fans, especially watching this video? Do you think there's a chance he stays with the Rangers? A lot of, talk around him. I can see the Rangers having a chance to kind of have him on a trial here, see how it goes, but not really convinced he stays. So we'll see. Could he be the guy for the Vancouver Canucks? Chris Johnston certainly seems to think that's a possibility. Now, we know Taylor Hall, the Blackhawks, is a good chance. The former league MVP is likely going to get dealt this year in the final year of his contract. Has found pretty good chemistry lately, playing on a line with Bertuzzi and Connor Bedard. But does it make sense for Hall to stay in Chicago longer term and be re-signed when, I don't think the Hall experiment in Chicago has gone overly well. It's been a little better lately, but, we've even seen him be a healthy scratch this year. I don't think there's a future for him in Chicago long term, and we know that there's going to be teams that like his experience, and obviously are hoping that he can be an addition to their lineup later in the year. I think that the article here, the suggestion from Chris Johnston that makes a lot of sense, is the Colorado Avalanche. The Avalanche are a team that we know, especially if Landeskog does not return, Taylor Hall could be a viable option. He's making $6 million on the AAV, but certainly they could be some retention to knock that down. But we know the Avalanche are going to be very much looking to likely add in the forward group, assuming Landeskog doesn't come back. If he does come back, that's going to throw a major wrinkle with their cap situation, and I'm not really sure if they can navigate through really adding much of anything if he's in the mix here. But otherwise, Taylor Hall could be a pretty good replacement. Now, and to me, he's not the player he once was. Not the same guy that was the league MVP with the Devils a number of years back, but still somebody with a lot of experience and scoring ability in a secondary role. Could be somebody to watch for the Colorado Avalanche. Now, Brandon Tanev is a name that's been in the rumor mill really since the offseason. We know that the Seattle Kraken, pretty good chance, don't extend him, and he's a good candidate to be traded ahead of the deadline. Pierre LeBrun suggests New Jersey, whereas Chris Johnston suggests the Vegas Golden Knights. And to be honest, when it comes to Tanev, New Jersey and Vegas, I can see both teams being a potential fit there. Both teams are pretty much a given to be in the playoffs and will be making additions to their roster. I think that's pretty safe to say. And Tanev's a guy who can give you bottom 6 minutes. He can kill penalties. He can block shots. He's got just some intangibles there that you could like that can play a role for you. So to me, I think he'll be a good pickup at the deadline for one of these teams to get into that type of role. So I can see either of those options being viable for sure. Now, one thing that was mentioned was the Montreal Canadiens right shot defenseman David Savard. Pierre LeBrun suggested rather than see the Panthers go after a guy like Will Borgen, he thinks the Panthers are a logical destination for David Savard. Of course, we know the Panthers' blue line, to me, it's a little bit thinner than it has been in years past. We saw them be depleted a little bit with guys that they couldn't afford to keep because of the cap and the raises that they were allowed. I mean, they lost Montour and Ekman Larsson from last year. They made Forsling a priority to get re-signed. Obviously, Ekblad is still there. They're going to be creative to re-sign him as well. But Savard could be an option for them. And he references the relationship with former Columbus, employee Bill Zito. Remember, Bill Zito, the manager of the Panthers, used to work in Columbus, where David Savard spent a large part of his career. So there's a lot of familiarity there. Zito would have seen and known what this guy can do firsthand. Clearly, like I said, a guy with a lot of experience and has a Stanley Cup on his resume from his time with the Lightning, and certainly a guy who can be defensively responsible, block shots, etc. And in the right role, again, if you're slotted appropriately, I think David Savard could be a big help to a number of teams going into the playoffs. The Panthers, to me, do make a lot of sense. So we'll see if that works out or how things go on that front. That is all your news and rumors here for today. Of course, let me know your thoughts on everything down in the comment section. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.